When he was 18, they gave him a cardboard box and a bus token. What he discovered would change not only his future, but the past he thought he knew. If you've ever felt like you were starting from zero, or that the world had already written you off, hit that subscribe button. You're in the right place, and this story is for you. The day I turned 18 was the day I ceased to be a problem for the state of Illinois. It didn't feel like a birthday. It felt like an eviction. Mrs. Gable, the house manager at Northwood Group Home for Boys, handed me a thin manila envelope with my name on it and a cardboard box that contained everything I owned. 2 pairs of jeans, a few threadbare t-shirts, a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, and a toothbrush. 18 years, and it all fit in a box I could carry with one arm. "Happy birthday, Leo," she said, her voice holding the same practiced, detached warmth she used for everything from announcing dinner to breaking up a fight. She wasn't unkind, just tired. The whole system was tired. "Thanks," I mumbled, not meeting her eyes. I was focused on the scuffed linoleum floor, tracing the patterns with my worn-out sneakers. Freedom was supposed to feel big. It was supposed to be this rush of wind, this open door to a new life. For me, it just felt like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark. The box felt heavy, not because of what was in it, but because of what wasn't. "There's a check in there for the final stipend," she continued, tapping the envelope. "And some paperwork. Your social security card, birth certificate, the usual. There's also a letter from the Department of Family Services. Came for you last week." I took the envelope. It felt impossibly thin to hold the architecture of a life. The stipend, I knew, would be a few $100s. Enough for a security deposit on a room in a place I wouldn't want to live, or a few weeks in a motel if I was careful. It was get-started money, or get-lost money, depending on your perspective. "Good luck, Leo," Mrs. Gable said, and for a second, I thought I saw something real in her eyes, a flicker of genuine concern. Or maybe it was just pity. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. "Yeah, you too." I turned and walked out the heavy steel door, the kind that locked automatically behind you. The click it made was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a period at the end of a long, miserable sentence. I was free. I was homeless. I was 18. I walked to the bus stop at the end of the long driveway, the gravel crunching under my feet. The box bumped against my hip. I didn't look back. There was nothing to look back at. Northwood wasn't a home. It was a holding pen. A place to keep kids like me until we were old enough to be someone else's problem. I sat on the cold metal bench and opened the envelope. The check was there, as promised. My documents, all crisp and official. A stark contrast to the frayed edges of my life. And then there was the other letter, the one from DFS. The envelope was thicker, more formal. I tore it open. It wasn't the usual bureaucratic nonsense. It was from a division I'd never heard of, the Office of Probate and Estate Management. It informed me, in dense legalese, that upon reaching the age of majority, I was the sole heir to the estate of one Thomas Alistair Finch. My grandfather. The name hit me like a stone. I knew it, of course, but it wasn't a name connected to warm memories. It was a ghost's name. My mother had died when I was 5, and my father had simply vanished a year later, a puff of smoke in a cheap suit. I was told my grandfather, my father's father, was still alive but had relinquished his rights. That's the phrase they used. It sounded clean, sterile, like he'd signed a form and washed his hands of the mess his son had left behind. I'd spent 12 years in the system believing I was abandoned, not once, but twice. The letter stated that the estate consisted of a single asset, a property, 48 acres of rural land and a farmhouse in a place called Blackwood Creek. I'd never heard of it. The letter concluded by instructing me to contact a Mr. Arthur Davies, an attorney in Blackwood Creek, to discuss the particulars of the inheritance. I stared at the paper, the bus rumbling to a stop in front of me. The doors hissed open. My plan, such as it was, had been to take the bus downtown, find the cheapest weekly rate motel I could, and start looking for a dishwashing job. It was a small plan, a survivor's plan. This letter wasn't part of it. A farm, an inheritance. It felt like a joke. A cruel, cosmic punchline to a life that had already been full of them. I folded the letter, shoved it in my pocket, and got on the bus. The token felt cold in my hand. It was the last thing the state would ever give me, or so I thought. 2 days later, I was sitting in the stuffiest office I'd ever been in. It smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and disappointment. Mr. Arthur Davies was a man who looked like he'd been born in a gray suit. His hair was gray, his eyes were gray, and his skin had the pale, papery quality of a legal document left in the sun too long. He peered at me over a pair of bifocals perched on the end of his nose. "Leo Finch," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "I'll be frank with you, son. This isn't a winning lottery ticket." He slid a file across his massive oak desk. I didn't touch it. "Your grandfather, Thomas, passed away nearly 2 years ago. The state has been acting as caretaker of the property since you were a minor with no available guardian. Now that you're 18, it's yours. Or rather, the problems associated with it are yours." "Problems?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the big, quiet room. "First, there are significant back taxes owed. Nearly $5,000. Second, the property is, to put it mildly, in a state of extreme disrepair. The county has cited it multiple times. It's considered derelict, condemnable even." He let that hang in the air. "It has no real-world value in its current state. The cost to make it habitable, let alone profitable as a farm, would be astronomical." I felt a hollow feeling in my stomach. Of course it was a ruin. It was a perfect metaphor for the family I came from. "So what's the point?" I asked, a bit more harshly than I intended. "Why even tell me about it?" Mr. Davies leaned back, his chair groaning in protest. "Because of this." He pulled a single, crisp sheet of paper from another file and slid it over. It was a letterhead from something called the Viridian Development Corporation. It was an offer. A formal, legal offer to purchase the 48-acre property, as is, for the sum of $75,000. I stared at the number. $75,000. To me, it might as well have been 75 million. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding in my life. It was enough to change everything. An apartment, a used car, college maybe, a real start, a real life. "They want the land," Davies explained. "They've been buying up all the old farms on that ridge for a new luxury housing development. Golf course, gated community, the whole 9 yards. Your grandfather's place is the last holdout. They've been trying to get it for years. He always refused." "Why?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Davies shrugged, a small, tired movement of his shoulders. "Pride? Sentiment? Stupidity? Who knows? Thomas was a stubborn man, but he's gone, and you're here. And you, son, are in a position to be practical." He laid out the math for me. Viridian's offer would cover the back taxes, his legal fees, and still leave me with a little over $65,000. "A clean break," he called it. "You sign the papers, we settle the debts, and you walk away with a sizable nest egg. You never have to set foot in Blackwood Creek. You can start fresh, put all this behind you." It was the smart choice. The only choice, really. Take the money. Run. Forget the ghost of a grandfather who'd signed me away. Forget the dilapidated farm and its mountain of problems. It was a gift, a get-out-of-jail-free card. But something in me hesitated. It was a small, quiet thing, a flicker of, what? Curiosity? Spite? I didn't know. This man, my grandfather, had held on to this worthless piece of land for years, refusing an offer that could have made his life easier. He had let me go, but he hadn't let this farm go. I didn't understand it. And I realized, sitting in that stuffy gray office, that I couldn't sign it away without understanding it. I couldn't sell a memory I didn't even have. I want to see it first, I said. Mr. Davies blinked, surprised. See it? Son, there's nothing to see but weeds and rot. I have photographs here if you— No, I said, my voice firmer now. I want to see it for myself, before I decide. He sighed, a long, weary exhalation that seemed to suck the remaining oxygen out of the room. He looked at me like I was a complicated tax form he didn't want to fill out. It's a 2-hour bus ride from the city, another 30-minute walk from the town depot. There's no running water, no electricity. It's not a pleasant place. I'm not looking for pleasant, I said. I'm just looking. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He scribbled an address and a bus route on a notepad. Very well. The offer from Viridian stands for 30 days. Don't take too long to come to your senses. He handed me the slip of paper. The key to the property was taped to the back. A single, old-fashioned skeleton key, its metal worn smooth with time. It felt heavier than it should have. The bus ride to Blackwood Creek was a slow journey backward in time. The cityscape, with its hard angles and gray concrete, bled into sprawling suburbs, which in turn dissolved into strip malls and gas stations. Then, finally, the landscape opened up. The world turned green and gold. Fields of corn and soy rolled away on either side of the highway, punctuated by stands of ancient oaks and the occasional weathered silo leaning against the sky. It was a different universe from the one I knew. My world was pavement, brick, and chain-link fences. This world was soil and sky. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching the miles scroll by. I tried to picture him, Thomas Finch. What kind of man lives in a place like this? What kind of man lets his only grandson grow up in a series of sterile, state-run rooms, while he holds onto 48 acres of dirt? The anger I'd carried for 12 years was a familiar weight, a hard knot in my chest. But now, it was mixed with a confusion that felt new and unsettling. The bus let me off in the center of Blackwood Creek. The town wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. A single main street with a post office, a general store with a dusty front window, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a handful of houses with peeling paint and sagging porches. The air smelled of damp earth and cut grass. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels loud when you're used to the constant hum of the city. I checked the address on the slip of paper and asked the man behind the counter at the general store for directions. He was old, with a face like a road map and eyes that had seen too many seasons come and go. "Finch Place?" he said, his voice a low rumble. He looked me up and down, taking in my city clothes and the nervous energy humming off me. "You family?" "His grandson," I said. The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Haven't seen anyone head up that way in a long time. Not since the old man passed. You be careful. Roads washed out in places." He gave me a set of simple directions that ended with, "You can't miss it. It's the last place on the ridge before the road gives up." The walk was longer than I expected. The pavement turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to a rutted dirt track that climbed steadily upward. The air grew cooler, cleaner. The houses thinned out until there was only the road and the trees. After nearly 40 minutes of walking, I saw it. "The road gives up" was an understatement. It just sort of ended, dissolving into a sea of weeds and overgrown grass. And there, set back from the end of the road, was the house. Mr. Davies's description hadn't done it justice. Derelict was too kind a word. It was a skeleton. The roof sagged in the middle like a broken back. The porch listed to one side, its columns rotted through. Paint peeled from the clappered siding in long, curling strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. Windows were broken, dark eyes staring out from a forgotten face. The entire property was being swallowed by nature. Weeds choked the yard, vines crawled up the walls, and a small forest of saplings had taken root where a garden might have once been. It was awful. It was a ruin. And yet, there was something about it. The way it sat on the crest of the ridge, overlooking the entire valley below. The sheer size of the ancient oak tree that stood guard beside it. It wasn't just a wreck, it was a magnificent wreck. A testament to stubbornness. A place that had refused to fall down completely. I stood there for a long time, just looking. The only sound was the wind rustling through the tall grass. This was it. This was my inheritance. A pile of rotting wood and a field of weeds. The smart move was to turn around, walk back to town, catch the next bus, and call Davies to tell him I'd signed the papers. But I didn't. I took the old key out of my pocket. Its cool, smooth metal felt solid in my hand. I walked up the crumbling porch steps, my feet crunching on debris, and faced the front door. It was a heavy oak door, scarred and faded, but still solid. The key slid into the lock with a rusty scrape. I turned it. With a deep, groaning click, the lock disengaged. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air inside was thick and stale, heavy with the smell of dust, decay, and damp earth. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows and hazy shafts, illuminating a universe of floating dust motes. The inside was as bad as the outside. Plaster had fallen from the walls in great chunks, revealing the lath and beam skeleton beneath. The floorboards were warped and stained. In the main room, a single armchair sat covered in a dusty sheet, a lonely ghost in the center of the space. I walked slowly through the downstairs rooms. A small kitchen with a rusted-out stove and cupboards hanging open on broken hinges. A dining room where the table had collapsed under its own weight. Everything was covered in a thick blanket of dust and cobwebs. It was a house that had been holding its breath for a very long time. But as I looked closer, I started to see things. Small things. In the kitchen, a row of empty canning jars lined a shelf, their labels faded but still readable. T. Finch, tomatoes, summer '98. On the wall by the back door, a series of pencil marks charted a child's growth. The highest one was labeled Daniel, age 10. My father. These weren't just signs of decay, they were signs of life. A life that had happened here, in these rooms. A life I knew nothing about. I felt like an archaeologist, unearthing a lost civilization. My own. I went upstairs. The steps groaned under my weight, each one a complaint. There were 2 small bedrooms. One was completely empty. The other contained a simple iron bed frame, a collapsed dresser, and a small nightstand. On the nightstand was a single framed photograph, face down in the dust. I picked it up. I wiped the glass with the sleeve of my shirt. It was a picture of a young woman with a bright, laughing smile, holding a small boy on her lap. The boy couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. He had a mess of dark hair and a serious expression even then. It was my mother, and it was me. I'd seen pictures of her before, but none like this. So alive, so happy. I traced the outline of her face with my finger. Where was my grandfather in this picture? Where was my father? Who took it? The house wasn't giving up its secrets easily. I put the photo in my jacket pocket and continued my exploration. I knew, logically, that I should be looking for things of value, things I could sell. But I wasn't. I was looking for something else. An explanation. A reason. The last stop was the barn. It stood about 50 yards from the house, a massive structure even bigger than the house itself. Its red paint was almost entirely gone, faded to a pale, ghostly pink. One of the huge sliding doors was off its track, hanging at a precarious angle. I squeezed through the gap. The inside of the barn was cavernous. Huge, hand-hewn beams crisscrossed high above in the shadows. The air smelled of old hay, dust, and engine oil. Light filtered in through cracks in the walls, striping the dusty floor. It was mostly empty. A few pieces of rusted farm equipment sat in a corner, looking like the skeletons of forgotten beasts. Stacks of rotting pallets leaned against a wall. It felt sad. This place was built for work, for life. Now it was just a big, empty box. I walked the perimeter, my footsteps echoing in the immense silence. I was about to leave, convinced there was nothing here but more decay, when I saw it. Tucked away in the darkest corner, behind a pile of old tires, was a heavy-duty, military-style footlocker. It was painted olive drab and secured with a thick, rusty padlock. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was different. Everything else in the house and barn was old, neglected, falling apart. This was solid. This was secured. This was meant to last. I dragged it out into a shaft of light. It was heavy. I knelt and examined the padlock. It was old, but it wasn't rusted through. There was no getting into it without a key or a pair of bolt cutters. I searched the area around the footlocker, digging through piles of old hay and debris, but found nothing. I went back to the house. I searched every drawer in the collapsed dresser, every shelf in the kitchen. Nothing. I was about to give up, to chalk it up as another dead end, when my foot snagged on a loose floorboard near the hearth in the main living room. It was barely noticeable, but one edge was raised just a fraction of an inch higher than the others. I knelt down. I worked my fingers into the gap and pulled. The board came up with a low groan, and there, nestled in the dark space beneath, was a small, tarnished brass key. It wasn't the key to the house. It was smaller, thicker. My hands were shaking as I walked back to the barn. I knelt in the dust in front of the footlocker. I slid the brass key into the padlock. It was a perfect fit. With a grating squeal of protest from the rusty metal, the lock sprang open. I took a deep breath. I felt like I was standing on the edge of that cliff again, but this time, there was a sliver of light in the darkness below. I lifted the heavy lid of the footlocker. I think a part of me expected to find money, or something valuable. Something that would make the $75,000 offer seem small. But it wasn't money. The chest was filled with papers, old tools, and a stack of thick, cream-colored envelopes bound together with a piece of twine. On the top envelope, written in a strong, steady hand, were two words: "For Leo." My breath caught in my throat. I sat down on the dusty floor of the barn, the heavy lid of the chest resting against my back. The light from the cracked wall illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. I untied the twine. The letter on top was thick, the paper soft with age. I opened it. The handwriting inside was the same as on the envelope, but it filled page after page. "Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I hope the world has been kinder to you than I was able to be. I know you must have questions. I know you must hate me. I wouldn't blame you. The story they told you, the one about me relinquishing my rights, is the story I asked them to tell. It was easier than the truth. The truth is, I didn't abandon you, son. I hid you. I had to stop reading. My eyes were burning. I read that last line again. I didn't abandon you. I hid you. The words didn't make sense. The foundation of my life, the central, defining fact of my existence, was that I had been thrown away. By my father, and then by my grandfather. This letter was claiming it was all a lie. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. Your father, Daniel, was a good boy. He had a good heart. But he was weak. He fell in with the wrong people. When your mother got sick, the medical bills they were a mountain we couldn't climb. Daniel got desperate. He borrowed money. Not from a bank. He borrowed from a man named Marcus Thorne. Thorne wasn't a loan shark. He was something worse. He was a predator who bought people. He used debt to control them, to make them do things. By the time your mother passed, your father owed Thorne a fortune. Thorne didn't want the money. He wanted this farm. This land has been in our family for 100 years. But to Thorne, it was just a piece of a puzzle. He was the front man for a new development company, Viridian, that was quietly buying up all the land on this ridge. They used threats, intimidation, predatory loans, whatever it took. They wanted everyone out. I refused to sell. After your mother died, Thorne saw his chance. He owned your father. And through your father, he thought he owned this place. Your father tried to stand up to him. He came to me, confessed everything. We were going to fight, but Thorne's people, they weren't just lawyers, Leo. They were dangerous. They paid your father a visit one night to send a message. They put him in the hospital. When he got out, he was a different man. He was broken, terrified. Not for himself, but for you. He knew Thorne would use you to get to me. A week later, your father was gone. He just disappeared. I think he ran, hoping that if he was gone, the debt would be gone with him. But it wasn't. It fell to me. And Thorne made it clear that you were the leverage he would use to collect. I was an old man, Leo. I couldn't protect you here. I couldn't fight them and keep you safe at the same time. They would have used you. They would have hurt you. So I did the only thing I could think of. I made you disappear. I contacted the state. I told them I was unable to care for you. I signed the papers. I relinquished my rights. I let them take you, let them put you into the system where Thorne couldn't find you, where you would be just another number, another file, safe. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. It broke my heart every single day for the rest of my life. I chose to let you hate me so that you could live. My vision blurred. Tears were streaming down my face, dripping onto the yellowed paper. I wiped them away with the back of my hand. Every memory I had of my childhood, every feeling of being unwanted, of being discarded, it was all shifting, reforming into a new, terrible, beautiful shape. It wasn't abandonment. It was a sacrifice. A desperate, brutal act of love. I cried. I sat there in that dusty barn, and I cried for the little boy who felt so alone. I cried for the young man who had built his entire identity around being the one who was left behind. I cried for the father I never knew, broken and scared. And most of all, I cried for the old man, my grandfather, who had chosen a life of solitude and heartbreak just to keep me safe. When the tears finally stopped, I kept reading. I spent the next 12 years fighting them. They couldn't force me to sell, but they could make my life hell. They filed frivolous lawsuits. They reported me for code violations. They cut off my access road. They tried to bleed me dry. But I held on. I held on because this farm isn't just land, Leo. It's the last piece of leverage we have against them. Thorne and his partners at Viridian didn't just use dirty tricks. They broke laws. Serious ones. And I have the proof. In this chest, you'll find some of my old tools. But you'll also find another letter. It will lead you to a place on this property. A place I built. In that place is everything I gathered over the years. Ledgers, signed affidavits from other farmers they cheated, recorded conversations. Everything you need to expose Viridian and Marcus Thorne for what they are. The real inheritance isn't this farm, Leo. It's the truth, and it's a choice. Viridian will come for you. They'll offer you money, a lot of it, enough to make you forget this place ever existed. You can take it. You have every right to. After the life you've had, no one would blame you for taking the easy way out. You can sign the papers, walk away, and be free. That is one choice. The other choice is to stay, to fight, to use what I've left you to finish the war I started. It won't be easy. They will come after you with everything they have. But this land is yours. This home is yours. You can reclaim it. You can make them pay for what they did to our family, to this whole community. That is the other choice. I don't know which you will choose. I just wanted you to know the truth. I wanted you to know that you were never, not for one single second, unloved. Everything I did for you. Be a good man, Leo. That's all I ever wanted. Your grandfather, Thomas. I let the letter fall into my lap. The barn was silent, save for the sound of my own ragged breathing. The air felt thin, electric. The world had tilted on its axis. The story of my life, the one I had told myself for 12 years, had been a lie. A necessary lie, but a lie nonetheless. I felt a surge of emotions so powerful they almost knocked me over. Grief, sharp and overwhelming, for the man I had just met on these pages. Rage, hot and pure, at Viridian, at Thorn, at the injustice of it all. And a deep, aching love for a grandfather who had borne an impossible burden for me. I looked around the decaying barn. It didn't look like a ruin anymore. It looked like a fortress, a battleground. This wasn't just a property. It was a legacy. The $75,000 offer from Viridian felt like an insult. It was blood money, hush money. They weren't offering to buy a farm. They were offering to buy my silence, to bury the truth along with my grandfather. You know, it's funny. For years, all I wanted was an easy way out. A simple path. A life without struggle. And here it was, handed to me on a silver platter by a company that had destroyed my family. And all I could feel was disgust. I want to pause here for a second. Because maybe you've had a moment like this. A moment where the story you told yourself about your life was suddenly turned upside down. Where you found out a villain was a hero, or a sacrifice was hidden inside what you thought was a betrayal. It's a moment that can break you, or it can remake you. If you've ever felt that, if this story is hitting you in that place, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. You're not alone in this. This community is built on people who understand that the past is never as simple as it seems. Now, let's get back to what I found next. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then I turned my attention to the rest of the footlocker. As he'd said, there were tools, a heavy hammer, a pry bar, some wrenches, and beneath them, another sealed envelope. This one was smaller. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a hand-drawn map of the property and a short, cryptic rhyme. Where the stone hawk watches the sun rise, beneath its gaze, the real prize lies. Not gold or silver, but the weight of truth, to give an old man back his youth. I stared at the words. The stone hawk. It sounded like nonsense. I looked at the map. It was a rough sketch of the house, the barn, and the surrounding fields. On the eastern edge of the barn, there was a small X drawn. I got up and walked to the eastern wall of the barn, the one that would face the sunrise. The foundation was made of massive field stones fitted together a century ago. I ran my hands over them, looking for anything unusual. They were all just rocks. Rough, gray, and solid. Then I stepped back and looked at the wall as a whole. High up, near the peak of the roof, one of the stones was different. It was a large, flat piece of granite that had been crudely shaped. With a little imagination, it looked like the silhouette of a bird of prey, a hawk in profile, its beak pointing east. The stone hawk. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the foundation directly below it. Beneath its gaze, the real prize lies. The stones here looked the same as all the others. I pushed against them, one by one. They were immovable, solid as the earth itself. I was about to give up when I remembered the tools in the chest. I grabbed the pry bar. I started tapping each stone in the foundation below the hawk. Most of them gave a dull, solid thud. But one of them, a square stone about 2 feet off the ground, made a slightly different sound. A hollow echo. I wedged the tip of the pry bar into the seam around the stone. I put my weight into it. At first, nothing happened. The stone was sealed tight with old mortar. I repositioned the bar and tried again, grunting with the effort. There was a sharp crack. A spiderweb of fractures appeared in the mortar. I pushed again, and the stone shifted, scraping against its neighbors. It wasn't a foundation stone, it was a plug. I worked the pry bar around the edges, breaking the seal, until I could get my fingers behind it. It was heavy, but it came loose. I pulled it out and set it on the ground. Behind it was a dark, square cavity, and inside that cavity was a small, metal ammunition box, the kind with a rubber gasket to keep it waterproof. My hands were trembling so much I could barely unlatch it. I lifted the lid. Inside, packed neatly and wrapped in oilcloth, were several thick ledgers, a stack of papers held together with a binder clip, and a small, handheld cassette recorder with a single tape inside. This was it. This was the proof. This was the real inheritance. I sat there on the ground, the box in my lap, and I made my choice. Or maybe the choice made me. There was no other path. I couldn't take their money. I couldn't let them win. My grandfather hadn't raised a coward, even if he'd had to do it from a distance. I pulled out my cheap, prepaid cell phone. The signal was weak, but I had one bar. I found the number for Mr. Davies' office. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice as dry as ever. "Arthur Davies." "Mr. Davies," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my own voice was. "It's Leo Finch." "Ah, Leo. Have you come to your senses? Should I draw up the paperwork to accept Viridian's offer?" I took a deep breath, the clean country air filling my lungs. "No," I said. "I'm not selling. I'm staying. And I need you to tell me how we fight them." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him blinking in his stuffy gray office. "Son," he said finally, his voice laced with a mixture of pity and exasperation, "there is no we, and there is no fight. They have money, a team of lawyers, and a valid offer. You have a condemned shack and $5,000 in tax debt. This is not a battle you can win." "I think I can," I said. "My grandfather left me something. More than just the farm. He left me evidence, proof of what they did to get this land. I think he left me a weapon." Another silence, this one longer, more thoughtful. I could hear the faint sound of him tapping a pen on his desk. When he spoke again, the weariness was gone from his voice. It was replaced by something else, something I hadn't heard before. Curiosity. "Evidence?" he said, the word sharp and precise. "What kind of evidence?" "Ledgers, signed statements from other farmers, a tape recording. It's all here." "Don't say another word over the phone," he said, his tone suddenly urgent. "Don't touch anything else. Don't talk to anyone. Are you still at the property?" "Yes." "I'll be there in an hour. Stay put." He hung up. The next hour was the longest of my life. I put the ammunition box back in its hiding place and replaced the stone. I packed my grandfather's letters back into the footlocker and closed the lid, but I didn't lock it. I paced the length of the barn, my mind racing. For the first time since I'd stepped out of Northwood, I wasn't just surviving. I was doing something. I had a purpose. I was terrified, but I was also more alive than I had ever felt. True to his word, a little over an hour later, a dusty sedan crunched up what was left of the driveway. Mr. Davies got out. He looked different here, out of his natural habitat of paper and leather-bound books. His gray suit looked out of place against the backdrop of the decaying farm. He looked smaller, somehow. He surveyed the scene, his gaze taking in the collapsing house, the overgrown yard, the leaning barn. He shook his head slowly. He really let it go. He was busy, I said. Davies looked at me, a flicker of a new respect in his eyes. So you said, "Show me what you found." I led him into the barn and showed him the loose stone. We pulled it out, and I handed him the ammunition box. He opened it, and his professional demeanor took over. He handled the contents with a lawyer's careful touch, his eyes scanning the documents, his expression growing more and more grim. He spent a long time looking at the ledgers, his lips a thin, tight line. Finally, he picked up the small cassette recorder. "Is there a player here?" he asked. I shook my head. He pulled a small, portable cassette player from his briefcase. He popped the tape in and pressed play. A voice filled the cavernous barn. It was old, raspy, but clear. It wasn't my grandfather's. "And I'm telling you, Marcus, the old man Finch is a problem," the voice said. "He won't take the offer. He knows something." Another voice replied, this one smoother, colder. "Then we make his life difficult. We bury him in legal fees. We get the county on his back. We cut him off. He's one old man. He'll break." My grandfather's voice cut in, clear and strong, though it was obvious he was on a speakerphone. "Is this what you do, Thorne? Cheat and threaten old men out of their homes?" "It's just business, Thomas," Thorne's voice replied, dripping with condescension. "You should have taken the first offer. You should have convinced your boy Daniel to play ball. He was much more reasonable. After we helped him see things clearly." Mr. Davies stopped the tape. The silence that followed was heavy, profound. He looked from the tape recorder to me, and his face was pale. "That second voice," he said quietly. "That's Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Viridian. The first voice, that's a man named Henderson, one of his original partners. Henderson disappeared a few years back. Everyone assumed he fled the country to escape charges on an unrelated fraud case." "And my father?" I asked, my voice tight. Davies looked down at the documents. "According to these affidavits from 2 other farmers, Thorne's men used physical intimidation to force them to sell. What he just said about your father, it's a confession, Leo. It's an admission of assault, coercion, racketeering. This changes everything." He carefully packed the box, his movements precise and deliberate. "This isn't a probate case anymore. This is a criminal case." He stood up and looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man. He built a fortress of paper. He spent a decade collecting the stones to throw at Goliath. Can we win?" I asked. He allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Winning isn't the issue anymore. The issue is how much they're going to lose. But I'll tell you right now, this will be a long, ugly fight. They will try to discredit you. They'll dig into your past. They'll use the fact that you grew up in the system against you. They will try to break you, just like they tried to break him. Let them try," I said. That was the beginning. The months that followed were a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and hard, physical labor. Davies filed a massive lawsuit against Viridian on my behalf, citing fraud, coercion, and a dozen other charges. He also turned the evidence over to the district attorney. Viridian's lawyers responded with a flood of motions, trying to drown us in paperwork. They offered to settle, doubling their initial offer, then tripling it. We refused every time. It was never about the money. While the lawyers fought in courtrooms, I fought my own battle at the farm. I moved into the barn. It was dry, at least. I used the stipend money from the state to buy a generator, a sleeping bag, and some basic tools. Every day, from sunrise to sunset, I worked. I cleared the weeds. I tore off the rotten porch. I patched the roof on the house, one shingle at a time. I hauled away truckloads of debris. It was backbreaking work. I was tired and sore all the time. But every weed I pulled, every board I replaced, felt like a victory. I was taking the land back. I was making it mine. The people in town started to notice. At first, they were wary, watching me from a distance. They remembered my grandfather as a stubborn recluse. They probably thought I was just some city kid who'd give up after a week. But I didn't. The man at the general store, the one who'd given me directions, started giving me a discount on supplies. An old farmer down the road showed up one day with a tractor and helped me clear a field. He didn't say much, just, "Your granddad was a good man. Stubborn as a mule, but good." Slowly, I was being woven into the fabric of the place. I learned the names of my neighbors. I learned the rhythm of the seasons. I was becoming part of Blackwood Creek. One evening, after a long day of work, I was sitting on the newly rebuilt porch of the house, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of orange and purple. The house was still a long way from being a home, but it was no longer a ruin. It was a project. It was a promise. I thought about my grandfather. I realized that his inheritance wasn't just the evidence in the box. It was this: the land, the view, the quiet satisfaction of hard work. He hadn't just left me a weapon to fight his enemies. He'd left me a place to heal. A place to put down roots after a lifetime of being transplanted. Home, I realized, isn't something you're given. It's something you build. Sometimes, you have to build it out of the wreckage of the past. You have to clear away the rot and the weeds to find the solid foundation underneath. My foundation was built on the sacrifice of a man I never got to thank. The best I could do was to honor that sacrifice by building something that would last, by being the man he hoped I would be. The legal battle is still ongoing, but Mr. Davies is confident. The DA has opened a criminal investigation into Viridian. Marcus Thorne has stepped down as CEO. The housing development is on indefinite hold. We haven't won yet, but they are losing. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever be a real farmer, or if I'll just be a caretaker of this land. But I know this: I am not the same person who walked out of that group home with a cardboard box. I was a boy with no past and no future. Now I have both. I have a history to honor and a future to build, right here, on this ridge. My grandfather gave me more than a farm. He gave me back my story. And maybe that's the real lesson here. We all have a story. Sometimes, the world tries to write it for us. It tells us we're the kid who was abandoned, the person who failed, the one who doesn't deserve a second chance. But those are just drafts. We hold the pen. We get to write the ending. It might be harder than accepting the story someone else wrote for you, but it's the only way to write a story that's truly your own. Thank you for listening to mine. If you've made it this far, you're a core part of this community. A community for people who know that life isn't always easy, but it's always worth fighting for. If you have a story about reclaiming your own past or building a home where there wasn't one before, please share it in the comments below. I want to read it. Your story matters. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. It helps more than you know, and it means we can keep sharing stories that matter. Be good to yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.